Dirk Maggs,
Tim Quinn.
writer, producer, master of the airwaves, drummer. Are you sound sensitive?
I'm quite sound sensitive actually. Yeah, I find myself listening to things and getting strangely thrilled by the sound of water running down a drain, even if it's dirty water, if it sounds really good. Yeah, I can kind of get off on it isn't quite the right expression, but I can certainly appreciate a good sound. Crunchy footsteps, hard heels, it's all part of the, grammar, isn't it really?
When did the wireless first enter your world?
Well, I was born in Jersey in the Channel Islands, and we didn't have a television then. The television service hadn't reached Jersey. So it was only the radio to listen to. And my dad loved radio comedy, because during the war, when he was in the Navy, he used to listen to things like Itmar and all of that. So radio comedy was very much a part of the household. And during the 60s, it was Sunday lunchtime was Round the Horn or Beyond Our Ken, or Ken Dodd Show, or whatever it is, and Clitheroe Kid, all of that. So yeah, I think pretty early on I was sensitized to how visual a medium radio can be.
There was so much more though, wasn't there? There was Mrs. Dale's Diary.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Did you listen with Mother?
No, I didn't. I was a bit late for that. A bit late for a listen with Mother. Yeah, we got a telly sort of roundabout then, so the Wooden Tops and that became part of my life. For people of a certain age, the Wooden Tops doesn't sound like an insult.
But radio grabbed you. I mean, did this have any a ripple effect, say, at school? Were you producing anything at school?
No, quite the opposite. Actually, I wanted always to work in pictures. And when we were at school, I started a filmmaking society with a bunch of us. And round about the age of 15, we saw that Patrick Moore was coming to open a local fete. And so we thought we'd make a film of that. So we went and filmed him doing that, and we thought it was a bit boring doing documentaries, so we'd do the rest of his life story up to that point. So we did the Patrick Moore story, a sort of brief biography of Patrick, with model Airfix aircraft being burnt up in flames on the end of pieces of string because he was in the RAF. I mean, he flew in bombers, but we glossed over the fine detail in order to concentrate on the exciting stuff. Yeah, so we had this sort of romanticised film about Patrick, and then we did a Viking epic that lasted 20 minutes with us all dressed in cast-off bits of clothing turned into leggings and cardboard shields and what have you, running around the South Downs near Brighton.
What kind of equipment were you using?
An 8mm camera that shot 20 seconds at a time.
With sound?
No.
No sound?
No sound.
Silent
we had to sync that
movies.
later. It wasn't because we added it later, but that was kind of the skill. In a funny kind of way, that helped me get into sound, because having to make a soundtrack to the film we shot, we had to sort of post-sync everything. So, you had to add the effects and the music and all of that. And of course, it never stayed in sync with the projector, because there was no such thing as anything staying in sync. So we had a vary speed on the tape machine to slow it down a bit or speed it up. And occasionally we even stopped the playback for a moment just to catch up with where we were.
Are these films still available?
They exist, let's put it that way.
The archive, the Maggs archive.
They're in the archive, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure they're ever going to get out of it.
The anthology, when that finally comes
maybe
out.
one day, yeah.
Did Patrick ever see this? Because you became friends with him.
Yes, I did become very firm friends with Patrick. No, he never did. He wanted to see it, but I thought it was probably better for our friendship if he didn't. So yeah, but no, he didn't. But he became a dear friend.
School ends. Did you know where you were going? Did you have a plan?
I still don't know. Do any of us really know what we're going to be when we grow up? No, we left school, thought I wanted to be a drummer in bands. Wrote off to Paul McCartney because he was advertising for a drummer for Wings. Right. Didn't get it. I don't know why.
He had a few drummers.
Well, yeah, he did. Yeah, probably because I was a rubbish drummer at the time. So I went to, and I thought I wanted to be an actor. So I went to teach training college in Winchester in Hampshire, and I did drama. So I thought if I wasn't acting, I could teach. You see, as a backup. But my plan fell apart when I realised I was not only a lousy actor, but I wasn't a very good teacher either. So that went out the window.
How long did this take you?
This was a 4-year course as well. I took 4 years to find out what a mistake I'd made.
Right. Okay. A familiar tale.
A familiar tale. But the good news was that actually, what I ended up, a friend of mine went into the BBC as a trainee studio manager, and the one thing I'd always loved doing was playing with tape recorders, or rather there was a tape recorder. My parents ran children's homes, and they were in social services, and they ran children's homes, and they were very, for all the bad name children's homes get, my parents were very conscientious and so on. And my dad equipped this place with a tape recorder, and so the kids would play with it, and I'd play with it too, and we'd make little plays up. And I think that's kind of where I got the idea I was good with tape recorders. So when this job opportunity came up at the BBC, or this training opportunity, I went for it.
Training to do what?
To become a studio manager, which in those days was operating the tape machines, which of course no longer exist, but tape recorders, sound recorders, and doing sound desk, operating the sound desk.
What year would this be around about?
78.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and I kind of fancied that really, because what I wanted to do was, I thought, I'll do a year in radio, and then I'll go into television, and I'll become, kind of like the big filmmaker or whatever, and then I'll go into film. Not realising that, of course, nothing ever works out the way you thought.
The Ken Russell route.
The Ken Russell route, yeah, kind of thing, yeah. But actually, went into radio and went very quickly to television, and spent a couple of years in television as an assistant producer on mainly presentation, and I thought I was going to go to kids programs. I thought, quite fancied that, because those were the days when children's programs were on mainstream BBC.
Yeah.
But I wasn't enjoying it. I didn't enjoy telly. It was
Why not?
It was far too many people trying to achieve one small thing. The decision-making process was so bitty, and there were so many hoops you had to jump through just to get a simple idea on, that anything really ambitious would never happen. And also, it wasn't the age of HD and widescreen. It was very grainy. I remember while I was there, they were putting out a series called Lloyd George about Philip Maddock as Lloyd George, the politician of the First World War. And it was all sort of shot in these sort of browns, dark browns. And it was just like trying to peer through smog to see the actors. The image resolution was so low. Right. And something in me just said, no, you know what, I think actually I'd rather go back to radio, and I can play in bands on the side. And I just got a girlfriend who turned into my wife eventually. And so, but television wasn't working for me the way I thought it would. And then I spent a summer during my vacation, went over to Canada and worked on a feature film as a gopher, because that was where I thought I wanted to end up. And so I can, and this is a skill that is totally useless now, but was really pretty, cool thing to know then. I learned how to load a Panavision magazine for a Panavision movie camera, which was, sort of one of those skills in life that is absolutely pointless now, because digital technology has swept it all away.
What was the movie?
It was called Nothing Personal. It starred Donald Sutherland. It was about seal hunting, and it was shot in Toronto. My father's cousin produced it, and so I sort of blagged my way in as a gopher on the movie, but it wasn't a very happy set. I think my dad's cousin had fallen out with the director, who had in turn fallen out with Donald Sutherland. So in the end, I spent quite a lot of time not going to work, but just going down to Young Street and watching movies instead. But it put me off. That kind of put me off the film business too, because it all seemed very. So I was a bit lost and a bit at a loss. So I went back to radio and drumming really, as a kind of career and a hobby.
With radio, you sort of known for your comedy and drama.
Yeah.
Combination.
Well, I worked my way into radio light entertainment. That was the thing, which is where I wanted to go, because it was the source of all the comedy programs my dad loved, when I was a kid. So although he died by then, sadly, it was kind of great. I thought, the old man would be pleased with me. But the other thing was that I loved comedy. I also wanted to do. I wanted to try and play with the medium, because it seemed to me you could. This was around the time. There was around a time when all the big Hollywood stars started dying. It was a bit like all our favourite pop people seem to be dying at the moment. Bowie's gone and so on, and Prince, R.I.P. all of them, And that time it was the Hollywood stars. And every time one died, they would play a clip from one of their movies on the radio as a sort of, eulogy. And it's really interesting if you listen to movie clips, whether they be old or new. because there's always the visual element that you're missing, but the sound effects are there covering it. So somebody in a chair is sort of moving about and doing all this and so on and so forth. And if you're not looking at the pictures right now, but just listening to the sounds, you can tell I'm rubbing my hands or whatever it is and so on and so forth. So you're listening to this, and while listening to one of the, you know, Betty Davis, let's say, and you're listening to this, and I'm hearing all this, I'm thinking, you know, I'm actually seeing this movie. This is not a movie I've seen, what, a Dark Victory or whatever it is. It's not a movie I've seen, but I'm in my head, I'm creating an image of what's going on in that scene while these people are playing the dialogue. It's more than just two heads. And it doesn't sound like a radio play, but it could work as a radio play. So I had it in my mind that if you could take film soundtrack elements and turn them into some kind of audio theatre thing, you could make something that's a little bit more than a radio play, a little bit more than sort of people talking in a room. Ah, yes, I see. Is that tea you're drinking, Vicar? You know, you don't. You maybe can just hear the slurp and assume it's tea, or that kind of thing. So, Radio Light Entertainment was kind of the perfect place to go because they did light drama as well, as opposed to heavy drama like Chekhov, I guess. And so I went in, and one of the programs I sort of sold them, one of my test pieces, you have to go in and pitch a couple of programs, and that helped you get the job, was because it was Superman's 50th birthday in 1988. And I said, how about doing a birthday program about Superman? Oh, a documentary. And I said, well, not necessarily a documentary. How would it be great if we could do something where we actually dramatise bits of Superman's comics? Because I wanted to do it with something. I wanted to try this technique with something like comic books, where there at that time wasn't a lot of sort of stuff to do with superheroes or comic books and so on, and it was a very visual medium.
Had comics been a part of your childhood?
Comics were a very big part of my childhood,
particularly DC.
Because you and I both share a love of comics, and we both kind of grew up with all that wonderful sort of, was it Silver Age they call the early 60s, late 50s to about the mid 60s. And yes, because I lived in children's homes, and of course a lot of the kids had family overseas. And so, and if the family were on the other side of the world, like in the Caribbean or in North America, suddenly we'd be getting like comic books, and we'd be getting DC Comics, and we'd be getting the 92-page specials or whatever it was, all these fantastic books. So I was lost in piles of Superman and Superboy and Green Lantern and The Flash.
So you knew the territory by the time.
Knew the territory, totally. So when I heard it was Superman's 50th birthday from somebody who worked at DC that came to the BBC that I bumped into, I just knew I had to try it. And that was the moment, I actually can remember the moment we first of all I thought, let's put Superman on trial for his life. And let's say he's being accused of crimes against humanity. And there was a sort of a precedent for this in the comic books where Superman was interfering too much in our destiny. He was getting in the way of mankind finding its own way forward. And it's quite a nicely argued point, really. You know, if someone comes in like Superman, how do we learn to deal with the stuff ourselves? So it was a good point. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have Lois Lane defending him, Lex Luthor prosecuting him? Let's assume they assume legal powers for a day. It could be judged by one of the DC's extraterrestrial wise characters, which was a guardian of the universe. And Supes is bound in kryptonite chains in the defendant's box. And we call in all these witnesses, but we didn't just call in witnesses like Tim Quinn, comics fan from Liverpool. We called in people like Dave Gibbons, comic book writer for 2000 AD and then Watchmen for DC with Alan Moore. And we called in Jeanette Kahn, who was DC Comics executive editor. And wonderfully, we called in Adam West as a witness for the defence. And Adam West was brilliant value because he was in Broadcasting House. We'd already recorded it. Oh no, we were just about to record it. And I heard he was coming in to publicise another bunch of reruns of Batman. So I literally grabbed him in the corridor. I said, Mr. West, could you spare me 5 minutes? Yeah, sure, of course. And then we took him in the studio.
Perfect timing.
And he said, it was perfect. And he said, what do you want to ask me? I said, I suppose you're a witness for the defence of Superman. and I put this question to you. How would you answer it? And I had about 3 questions I'd written on the back of a matchbox. Yeah. And I put them, and he was brilliant. Just dropped right in and go, well, yes, absolutely. Superman is a force for good and all of this. And at one point I asked him, how would it be, I forgot the exact question, but how would it be in a world without Superman? He said, we would be riven. And I love that word, riven. Now, who uses that word in conversation?
One person.
Obviously Adam West,
yes.
Yeah. So that was great. So we had all these real people in this artificial, in this comic book world, but also we had Batman come in and give evidence. And there was a rather nice moment where it was reported that Adam West and Batman shook hands at the back of the courtroom before Batman took the stand. And of course Batman gets up and has ambiguous feelings about Superman because he's not sure he is a force for good. So that was kind of the start. But what I do remember very much is when I went into then the edit suite to cut all the takes down and put it all together and add all the sound effects, I kind of ran about 7 in the evening. I thought I can either stop now and deliver this as it is. It was about a 45-minute program, or I can stay here all night and add all those sound effects to the dramatized bit of comic book to make it sound like a movie. And that was when the penny dropped. And it was sort of 2 pennies dropped. The first penny dropped was, actually this could sound really good. And the second penny drop was, oh hell, if this works, I'm creating such a rod for my back in future, because everything I ever do, if this works, is going to involve this much more work than normally one would put in, because you were only budgeted for a day in the edit suite. So what I did was I just stayed all night. So I paid for a day on the show budget, but I was actually there for 24 hours.
It's a great example of learning on the job, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which you were able to do back then.
Yeah, I was, and the BBC wasn't equipped for this at all, because it was before digital gear. We were on analog gear, and the desks we used were like battleship grey, with if you opened a channel like a fader, you didn't push a lever up a chute. You turn this thing like one of the seacocks on the Titanic, it's kind of...
So you're wearing a lab coat, I assume?
No, but yeah, no, we're not quite lab coats, but close enough, yeah.
You sold it to the BBC.
Yeah, well, it was bought, yeah.
You had to sell it to DC
I had
as
to pitch it. I had to pitch it, yeah.
How did they take to the idea initially?
They did. Actually, it was funny because because I didn't know anything. I didn't know I was breaking any rules.
Was it the letters BBC maybe that?
Well, the thing was, I was as a member of staff, or I was on contract, but as a member of staff, I could do this. They'd bought the programme, but what I didn't know was that I wasn't supposed to spend 24 hours in an edit suite, for example, doing it. I wasn't supposed to spend that much time, and then just sort of say, actually, I'm going to go home and sleep now because I really can't do, a day in the office. Not that there was anything to do, because, I'd just done it. But the other thing I didn't know was that when I rang the editor of the Radio Times to say, I've actually just done this really good piece about Superman, do you think you might want to have something on the cover because Dave Gibbons is in it and he might draw you a picture of Superman jumping out a birthday cake? I had no idea whether he would or not, but... So I said this, and they said, yes, please. And I rang Dave, and he said, God, yeah, put them in touch. So I did. And of course, what I didn't realise was, I got the most almighty telling off from my boss, because of course I'd gone over his head, because you're not supposed to ring Radio Times without talking to your department boss first, and so on. But he was quite pleased too, because they hadn't had a cover in not since Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
It was a difficult position for him.
Yeah, it was.
It has to come down on you. Like
Unwittingly, I played that hand of cards right, but it could have been dodgy. Yeah.
The Marx Brothers. Obviously, you love them.
Well, I know, yes. Well, anybody who loves comedy.
How did they enter your world?
When I was a kid, they used to show the Marx Brothers movies on TV late at night, these old 1930s, these zany madcap comedians who were actually brothers and came up in the vaudeville circuit of the Second World War and then in America, and then became by accident huge stars on Broadway because they opened their cheap, no budget, all gags show on the night that a big show didn't open. So all the critics who didn't go to the big show because it suddenly said it wasn't going to open went to see the Marx Brothers, and they were discovered. And these wonderful grotesques. And I was an avid lover of the films. I'd read all the books about them. As a child, I didn't know whether I wanted to be Harpo Marx, Errol Flynn, or John Lennon, but or rather Ringo, I should say. So I kind of, they'd always been heroes. And then I was working in the comedy department in BBC Radio, and I hadn't thought about the Marx Brothers in a long time, except nostalgically and fondly. And on the news came this story that in the Library of Congress in Washington, these people had found these old Marx Brothers radio scripts. I had no idea they did anything more than token radio appearances as the Marx Brothers in their characters of Groucho, Chico, and so on. And I, that morning, went into work having heard this on the sort of news, the Today programme or whatever, and the first thing I thought was, I've got to get a copy of this book of scripts that this guy's dug out of the Library of Congress. And I also, I think the first writer who popped his head round the door was somebody I knew loved the Marx Brothers, and I just said to him, hey, how about doing the Marx Brothers? I hadn't even pitched it. But then I went to the boss and I said, look, you know what, we could do these, because Dick Vosper and Frank Lazarus had done this sort of tribute show called A Day in Hollywood, Night in Ukraine. And I knew that the talent was there to play the brothers. Long story short, we got the rights. I rang Dick and say who the best blokes to play these parts, and he suggested Michael Roberts and Frank Lazarus, both of whom who'd been in this stage show as Groucho and Chico, who were the key characters on the radio show.
The radio show had not been kept.
They thought it was lost forever.
What period was it
1932.
So good period for the Marx Brothers.
Flywheel, Shyster and Flywheel. 1932. It was when they were really just cracking it with the movies, and a lot of the scripts for the radio show eventually ended up as sequences in the movies. So Monkey Business, for example, has got quite a few radio show things, and it was written by Nat Perrin, who was a wonderful writer who wrote for them, and later on he produced The Addams Family on TV in the 60s and so on, a very active writer. And I never met him, but he wrote me a lovely letter about how good he thought the shows were. He thought they were better than the originals, but that's very kind. But no, we did these 3 series of Flywheel, Shyster and Flywheel, and it was we had a 14-piece band, which is unheard of these days. We all dressed up for it. We all dressed in evening clothes, 1930s BBC. 1930s BBC evening clothes, and we and the boys dressed up in the outfits. So we had the only radio show with costume and makeup department, which was quite something for the BBC. Occasionally you might have the odd bit of clothing added, but never full costume and makeup. So wonderful. We had a fantastic time, and we ran 3 series, and they're still running them on BBC 4 Extra. It's still a big hit.
You've done the Marx Brothers. There's only one comedic place to go, really, isn't it, to follow them, and that's the Goons.
Well, absolutely.
How did that come about?
Well, again, it's like fanboy heaven, really. Yeah. But I met Spike Milligan in the late 80s when we were doing Children in Need, and he came in and did some links for us. And I'd always been a huge fan of the Goon Show, and Spike particularly, I always kind of felt for Spike, because everybody always went on about how he had mental illness, but really the point was that his work was absolutely magic. So the mental illness was not what he wanted to present to the world, and what I loved was the work, and the Goons were just wonderful. Peter Sellers, Harry Seacombe, Spike Milligan, this huge 1950s radio show that sort of was at the time revolutionary, and all the Pythons listened to it, and Barry Cryer, all the comedians who then came up through the ranks were big Goon fans.
And the musicians.
And the musicians, well, John Lennon would listen to it.
What were they compared to after A Hard Day's Night?
Well, exactly. Marx Brothers and the Goons, exactly. So, huge influence. I mean, Beatles have been a huge influence on me as well. One of the nicest things that have been said about what I do is comparing it to what the Beatles did, which is really nice. Not in terms of quality, but in terms of the amount of care and attention to detail, which I really appreciated. But no, the Goon Show, and it was the 50th anniversary, and I'd already done one documentary with Spike and Harry and Mike Benteen, who were the surviving members of the original troupe. During which time Michael Benteen scared me a bit, because he said, I rang him and said, look, we've done this documentary, it went really, really well. How would you feel about actually coming in the studio and actually redoing some of these early sketches? Maybe we could do something like we've done with the Marx Brothers with the Goon Show. And I said it to Harry, and he said, well, I said it to Spike, and he said, I'll do it if Harry will do it. Although I don't think it'll have the joy of the thing they used to have. And I said no, but there's still some funny stuff there. And I said to Harry, what about it? And he said, I'll do it if Spike will do it. So I thought, okay, two out of three is not bad. Now we haven't got Peter, but I can ask Mike Benteen. And Mike Benteen said, I rang him, and he said, I'll think about it, I'll think about it. But Mike was very into, how should we say, supernatural things. That was Michael's Michael was interested in everything. He was a physicist. He was in the RAF intelligence. His IQ count was in sort of, almost 4 numbers. He was an incredibly bright guy. Anyway, I was still doing this documentary at the time, and he came in for the interview, and we had this chat, and he said, I've been thinking about doing this thing with you, but I've had a conversation with Peter, and he's not happy about it at all.
Right.
And Peter had been dead for about 13 years by this time, but Mike had, been up the telegraph with Peter. So I thought maybe that wasn't a good time to do it. So anyway, 10 years went by, and that was the 40th anniversary, and then it was the 50th anniversary of the Goons. And I'd done, Flywheel was history by then. And I can't remember what sparked it off. Oh, I was talking to Norma Farnes, Spike's manager. And I said, I'd still like to do this. He said, well, if you want to do it, why don't you get some people like you did for the Goon Show? So I thought, well, yeah, I could do that. And I rang Andy Seacombe, Harry's son Andy, who's a writer, an actor, straight actor. He's been in all sorts of things. He was in Star Wars, the prequel once. He was the blue flying thing in that. He does all this stuff, And I said, how do you fancy doing your dad? He said, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. So I said, all right, just asking. And he went away. And then a couple of days later he rang back and said, actually, I've been talking to Dad, and he said I should do it because it'll be like taking over the family business. Aww. Which is so sweet, yeah. So, and Spike was cool about it. So we had Andy, and I needed 2 people who, what I thought was, if I just get impersonators, that's not going to sell this script. If we get a good script, I need people who can carry the script over the footlights, because that's really the thing. Got to communicate to an audience, especially, it was now, 40 years since the Goons had actually last performed. So you haven't got that guarantee of an audience anymore.
It's got to be good.
It's really, it's got to be funny.
As good as.
Good as. So I got Jeff Holland from Heidi High and Oh Mr. Porter, whatever that thing was. John Glover, who's been at Mr. Chumley Warner and the Harry Enfield things and so on. And Chris Timothy of later All Creatures Great and Small, all that, being the announcer, because his dad, Andrew Timothy, was the original Goon Show announcer. So got all of that, and then I thought, now I need the music. And I went to see Angela Morley, who was the original musical director for the Goon Show, and I said, would you do it? And she said, no, I won't do it, but I'll tell you who will do it. I know this bloke from Newcastle called, do you know what? Here I am. John Wilson. Sorry, it went out the mirror. It went out the window. John Wilson. This chap, he's got an orchestra, and he'd be just the person you want, because he's got all my old arrangements, and those he hasn't got, maybe you could get for him. So I'd never heard it. John Wilson now, of course, does these huge proms. He's a national treasure. He's this, keeper of all popular music, light and popular music since 1940. Went to see John. He said he'd love to do it. Got permission to go in the BBC. I'm going on about this, but it was such an adventure. Going to the BBC Music Library, went in the basement. There was one strip light still working down there, and right on the lowest level, we're in the library here, so this reminds me of it, except this is much drier and better lit. On the very lowest shelf were just these sheaves of manuscripts, and the edges were so frayed it was like looking at stalks of corn hanging there. And you pull it out, and it was like And it was, you know, the Goon Show, it was like Blood Knock intro. And it was all the handwritten part. And the ink had faded to the point where you had to get it out under the one strip light to really see it. And I said to John, how many of these can we actually get out under our coat? We've got to bring them back, but how many? Because we're only supposed to take about six of the manuscripts, you know, music manuscripts out. I said, we've got to go and save this. I said, can you get this lot copied? He said, yeah, absolutely. Let's just. So we walked out like Michelin men, kind of full of these cues, and he transcribed them and saved them for posterity. But here's the great part of the story was, we were going to do the show at the Playhouse Theatre. The audience, it was ticket unit audience. We didn't know who was coming. And John's orchestra turned up, and we'd done the read-through and we'd done the tech run without the band, so we knew all the sound effects played in and the boys were getting used to playing the characters and so on and so forth. But then John and the band turned up, and it was band call at 3, and these blokes, he has the top session people in London, and these blokes sat down, put the music in front of them, they hadn't seen it before, and he just gave them the downbeat, and it came in like that, and you couldn't get a cigarette paper between these guys. They were that tight, and I looked around. I was standing there just stunned as they went through these cues, and I looked around, and I'm in tears. I turned around. Jeff Holland's got tear tracks down his face, because, you know, something you hear live in the room that you've only ever heard played on a record, and a scratchy old one at that. Is an amazing thing, and the beautiful thing about that night was, and Jeff calls it his sort of Groundhog Day night, and so do I, is that we were we had the audience came in, and there were lots of kids in the audience. That scared me. And then Barry Cryer and Dick Vosborough walked in, and Barry said, "Hello, Dirk, we've come to bury you, not to praise you. You'll never pull it off. So thanks a lot, Baz. Your seat's over there." And then I went out and I did an intro which went on forever, but I had to thank everybody. I was under instructions by the production company, which wasn't mine at the time. So got out, did the intro, but what I did was I left the main curtains shut. There were just 3 microphones on stands out in front. So as far as they knew, they were come to see a reenacted Goon Show, and all they were going to get was 3 blokes standing on the stage. And as I walked on, I just said, and there's a taste of how it all began. And they flew the tabs out, and the band went straight in with the big band opening of Walking Backwards for Christmas. And I was watching from the wings, and the whole audience kind of just, oh, okay. And they were right, just with it from then on. And it was like building a comedy atomic bomb, because we split the atom in just the right place for the fission to happen, for the stuff to ignite, for the thing to happen, for the whole evening just flew by, and the audience were. My 9-year-old at that time son literally fell out in the aisle laughing, and he had no idea who Peter and Harry and Spike were. He's just laughing at how funny it was.
Harry and Spike
couldn't come, both too ill. Harry, in fact, died. Harry died 10 days later.
Oh. Yeah.
No, they didn't. But Spike heard it, sent him the recording, and Norma said that he thoroughly enjoyed it.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So that was like a magic moment.
Something quite different in comedy. Roy Hudd's show, The Headlines, which I imagine had to be up to the minute.
Yeah, and Roy's just celebrated his 80th birthday, so
really
happy
80th?
birthday, Roy. Yeah. And he's still going strong. He's just been Dame in a panto in London at the Brick Lane musical. No, learned everything I know about comedy, and in fact about writing, from Roy Hudd, June Whitfield, Chris Emmett. We had to turn out a comedy half hour once a week, every Thursday, based on the news. So on the Monday we didn't know what we'd have in the programme, and by Thursday lunchtime we had to be in the Paris studio in Lower Regent Street with 300 people in there, all expecting to laugh, and if they didn't laugh they'd let you know. And it was a trial by fire, because the first series I was still finding my feet, and I do remember round about show 8 out of 10, Roy took me aside and he said, "You know, Dirk, it's not working, Dirk, it's not working." He'd come right up to you, Roy, because his eyesight's not good. He went, "That's not working, Dirk, it's not good, it's a bit comic cuts, Dirk, bit comic cuts." And I said, "Okay, well, wasn't it not meant to be funny then?" "Oh yeah, it's to be funny, but it's got to have a point. Humour without a point is still not human. I said, well, what about the Marx Brothers? He said, that's got a point, because that's puncturing pomposity. That's overturning order. And okay. So the rules of drama apply here. And that was such a good kick up the backside for me. And the thing, and then the irony was that probably, so the next couple of weeks I'm really trying to fix this. And then there came a Thursday.
How do you go about fixing it? I mean...
Well, talk to the writers.
Right.
I start encouraging the writers to work up material in a certain way, finding an angle on a story. It's a bit like editing a newspaper. It's a good question, Tim, because in the end, the writers, you can only massage things into shape. You can't make it so because you're not writing it yourself. I mean, I would fix scripts, but it wasn't my job to be writing it. I had to marshal the resources. But no, it took a while. But about 2-3 weeks later, we had this script, and I thought, this is the one. This is the script that turns it around, and Roy will be happy. And I knew I was going in the right direction. Turned up at the Paris. All the writers were out on the pavement. This never happened. I said, what's wrong? Is there a fire drill? I said, no, been waiting for you. I said, what's wrong? Thatcher's just resigned. And I had a 40-page script. They were like, in the bin. Well, not quite. But it was seriously like, oh my goodness. Yeah. So basically said, okay, right, Mike Coleman, can you do us a sketch about this? Mike Dines, can you do that? Whoever else can you? And it was like patching the hole, where the iceberg struck. But we did it, and I think it actually was just what we needed. That boost of adrenaline was just what we needed to make this work. And from that point on, it flew, and I was really pleased. And when I came to leave Headlines, it was a very sad day for me. I hated leaving that show. I loved it. It ran and ran. I did 6 seasons on it,
right?
And I could have done 8, 10 easily. But there was a kind of unspoken rule that they rotated producers. That was one of the rite of passage programs you did in Light End, and rightly too. But I'm glad I got that and not weekending, because it was an either-or choice. I wanted Headlines, and I got it. And I think at the end of it, I think I put a mark on it that made it slightly leaner and meaner and hopefully funnier. But you'd have to get Roy on to check.
It's that wonderful mix of anti-establishment, but
it's
funny.
Gently anarchic.
Yeah.
And it used end of the pier humour, but it did it in a very clever way. But I mean, there were times, there was when I went in a reliance on certain stereotypes that I didn't like. And I tried to change that, and I think I did change that. But the basic end of the pier feel, I didn't change at all. In fact, I fought Roy all through, because Roy felt the band could be smaller, and I wanted to keep, we had horns in the band, and I wanted to keep the horns. Because I always think live music at any event warms up the room and makes it something special.
Of course, he is Mr. Musical, isn't he? So.
Well, Roy, I defer to no one in my admiration for Roy, but on that one I felt that if we lost some of the band, we'd lose some of the power, the energy that came off that stage. But Roy could power the Liverpool empire on his own. I mean, he's a force of nature. Yeah.
Back to superheroes.
Yeah.
Superman, the trial of Superman, that was a success.
Superman was, yes. So
which led to...
Well, they asked for more.
Batman.
So then we did a Batman docudrama, which went really, really well.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, that's all over. And then I got a phone call from Douglas Adams. This keeps veering off from superheroes, but the thing was, Douglas Adams then rings and said, I like what you're doing with these superheroes. How about you coming and finishing Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in its original medium? Because only the first 2 series were on radio. Then he wrote 3, then there was television and a couple of stage shows. And then he went out and wrote these 3 books, which were never radio shows. And he said, I'd like to make those radio shows, and I've heard what you do. Jeffrey Perkins is no longer with Radio Light Entertainment. Would you consider producing them?
No, he's become legendary, really, hasn't he?
Well, I know. Yeah, no, I was around there before he put the phone down, saying yes. So there was that. So that kind of, but it didn't happen at that time. No. And then I was at a very loose end, because I had no work lined up, because they cleared the diary for Hitchhikers. Light End had cleared my diary and Douglas's. So I went off to BBC Worldwide, who did all the audiobooks, to see if I could help them work out a plan for releasing stuff that people would buy, basically. And between that and trying to think of something to do, came up the idea of doing some more Superman. And doing more Superman, what I thought might be fun, I was looking, I found out what DC were doing, and they were doing this huge storyline called The Death of Superman. And it suddenly occurred to me that the time scale we were looking at and the time scale that this comic book series was running was pretty much the same thing. So we could release every week a half-hour program that would then sync up with where the comics were that week.
Never done before?
No, not
Has
done
it been
before.
done since?
No, I don't think so. And it was really exciting.
Yeah.
DC went for it. There was a lovely lady, Phyllis Hume, who was in their international rights. She sadly passed a few weeks ago, bless her. She was great. I owe her a lot. I mean, she introduced me to Dave Gibbons and Neil Gaiman for a start, you know, so she was more than a friend. But we did it, and we did this series for the old Radio 5. When BBC Radio 5 first started, it was more spoken word than sport. It was a kind of interesting mix, and we did these half hours. And that went very, very well indeed. And I thought, well, maybe there's a chance of doing more, and then nothing happened. But it happened suddenly. But no, nothing happened, and I thought, oh, well, that's gone. So I went back to doing, I think we were just, oh crikey, I was really thinking, what do I do now? When Matthew Bannister took over Radio 1, this was at the time when all the old DJs, the Dave Lee Travises and the Simon Bates and all of that were really, you know, well ensconced there. And he was instructed to turn it upside down and get a younger audience in. So all the old DJs were thrown out, which upset them a lot, and upset a lot of listeners, I have to say. But Matthew came to see us. He said, I've been to drama. They called all of us light end producers together, and he said, right, Matthew's here to talk to you all. You need some program ideas. And we all sort of, okay, right. And he said, look, here's the thing. We want to do a daily drama on Radio 1 that will appeal to the young listeners, and we want ideas. And I just thought, well, there's no point in me saying anything because I know what they're going to want. They're going to want sort of, you know, some kind of disadvantaged, drug-addicted, single parent living in a council flat, gritty slice of life drama, which I'm rubbish at grit. I can't do it. I'm all, you know, fluff and bright colours, really. So I thought, fine. And then so we went round, and there was, you know, somebody had the slice of life, somebody had the council house, somebody had the amputee single mother, you know, whatever. I mean, nothing wrong with this sort of stuff at all, but it was a bit, you know, depressing. And none of them, he didn't take any of them. And so in the end, I just said, how about Batman? He went, yes. And I thought, I've cracked it. And then he said, can you do it in 3-minute episodes? And I went, yeah. Okay, meeting's over, and I go out in the hall and say, how on earth can I do this in 3-minute episodes? Because what he wanted to do was drop it in between records. Right. In Mark Goodyear's afternoon drive time show. It was actually school pickup time. It was very clever timing. It was running out about 3:30.
So cliffhangers, in other words.
Well, it was everything that you and I know about comic books, which is really, it was a page at a time. Because, you know, I don't have to tell you, Tim, but in a comic book, you have X number of panels per page, and the first panel always picks up where the last page left off, and the last panel generally pushes you over to turn the page. It's just a little cliffhanger or some kind of really or something. And so really every 3 minutes was a comic book page.
Had you listened to, no, you're too young for Dick Barton. Had
yes.
all the famous serials come and gone by the time?
I'm actually only 22.
Yeah. But I mean, all those famous serials, Dan Dare and so on.
I knew of them. And Journey into Space, let's not forget Charles Chilton, one of the pioneers of, you know. But not in 3 minutes. And I remember they had a thing, the Writers Guild, one of the writers, the Today programme had one of the Writers Guild people on saying how it was impossible, a respected writer, impossible to do anything meaningfully dramatic in 3 minutes.
Great
and
challenge
I'm like,
then, yeah.
Okay, well no, it actually scared me because I was like, God, he's a real writer and all, you know. But here's the thing. I worked out a formula, and it was, first of all, I wanted to make it so they could all be edited together into one huge kind of audio movie. I began to describe these things as that. And the other thing was that in the 3 minutes, you start with a scene that tells a story up to this point, but is still moving things forward. You never have two people talking to each other. Or you can have Batman and Robin, or one of them had Batman and Robin in the Batcave saying, things are bad, aren't they, Robin? Yes, they certainly are, Batman, and so on. And in the background, the computer is reading out the list of the escapees from Arkham Asylum. Joker, Penguin, Amygdala, and so on and so forth. So that worked as an action piece because there was information flying around, and it was the Batcave. It depended on the location, but you catch up in you have an opening that catches up with where you were at. Then you have one major story beat in the middle, one plot evolution. You know, Firefly's escaped and he's setting fire to all downtown Gotham or whatever it is, and then you have the cliffhanger, which is probably where they drive south and find that they can't get to where Firefly is burning everything because there's a roadblock, or there's a big fight. Big fights were always, if I hadn't got a story beat, I just had a big fight. But anyway, it worked, but that was really the one. Batman Nightfall, it was called, and it's still available on CD. And it really, really sort of made things happen, and people heard it because you heard it.
I did hear it.
Yeah.
I was very aware of it.
And this is where you come into my life.
Maggs. I came into your life because I heard that. And my immediate thought was, why is he only doing DC comics? As I was working for Marvel Comics
a loyal Marvel employee.
Yes, much as I love DC, I thought there was more humour to be had out of
yes,
Marvel.
and I couldn't agree more.
Thanks to Stan.
At the same time as reading all those Golden Silver Age comics, I was also reading Silver Age Marvel.
Yeah.
And I loved Spidey from the moment he stopped some burglar rifling through someone's apartment, and his belt light flickered, and he said, "Damn, these batteries are low." And I loved him from that moment. Yeah, he was a human superhero.
So I go and meet with Radio 1 and say,
you worked actually a miracle, Tim. I think I should point out
by all
at
means,
this time that you were working at Marvel, and you were basically the guy who was finding cool stuff for Marvel to do. This was before Marvel got a clue about how to market themselves through the popular media.
Clueless is a word I would use about some of the management at the time.
That's entirely for you to say.
Far be it from
allegedly
me to put words in your mouth.
As a BBC producer, ex-BBC producer, I have to put on my allegedly cap. But the thing was, Tim, you did bring a fresh approach to what they were doing, and not only did you come and talk to me, but you also went and talked to Brian May, because you knew he was into comic books. And so we had this great thing of Spider-Man coming to Radio 1, and Radio 1 said, yep, didn't even, because they loved what was happening with Batman, the audience figures had gone up. And then you said, and Brian May. And so you and I went to see Brian, and it was exactly and we've remained friends with him ever since, and he brought into it this amazing music, you know, and so on.
I always described that series as the best comic I've ever worked on. A comic with no pictures but more visuals than anything else I've touched.
That was
sheer joy, thanks to your
job.
wonderful script.
Well, and the cast.
The
cast were great.
I remember coming to one of the moments, and seeing you, and you actually conducted the cast, and it's not a musical, but the way you worked was to. I've never seen anything like it in my life. So
well,
so that was Spider-Man.
Yeah, but you know, that was very, I'd say, good casting. It was good casting, but it was lucky casting, because it turned out they were the best cast, the ones where they all have a sense of fun, and they all did. And the outtakes from Spider-Man remain my favourite set of outtakes from anything I've ever done, because they were just all at it. I mean, I do remember Michael Roberts playing Dr. Doom, losing a line in the middle, so breaking off and starting doing Home Shopping Channel in the middle of a scene. And everyone else is just wetting themselves with laughter. It was that kind of atmosphere where people... And Bill DeFries, who played Spidey, went on to be the voice of Bob the Builder in America.
Oh, right.
And now has just won an Audie Award. He's doing audio productions of his own. And I'm about to go back and work with him as co-producers on something, so quite a big high-profile project later this year. So actually, it still comes full circle.
Yeah, fantastic.
So it's kind of a little Spidey reunion, you now and
Yeah.
in the States.
Well, quite right too.
Yeah.
You've worked for the BBC for
Yes.
a long, long time, in and out.
Laboured is the word.
Is it today? Is it a government subsidiary? Is it? What is it today? And more
yeah.
importantly, what is it tomorrow? What's your take on where the BBC is going?
There are two BBCs. There's a BBC that everyone has in their mind. If they care at all about the BBC, they have in their mind as being sort of the last bastion of excellence. In some ways, the BBC has the standards of the BBC are pretty high. When you look at the very, very best the BBC's ever done, the David Attenboroughs and the Goon shows and the Monty Pythons and that sort of level of stuff, you know, it's matchless, it's peerless, and the world over, the BBC is still seen as being one of the absolute paradigms of great broadcasting, and I love it dearly. But I left the BBC because I found it was getting too bureaucratic and I couldn't make programmes. There was so much paperwork to do, and I just felt it would be better if I left and went that way. But the BBC is this horrible paradox. They've got this ghastly thing, this licence fee, which people see as being a sort of a tax, and yet it's very hard. And the BBC is resisting become a subscription service because it then would very much shrink from where it is now. And although I don't believe the BBC should necessarily be running cookery pages on the internet at great expense or whatever, if the BBC shrunk appreciably, it would, I think people would suddenly realise what they've lost too late. And the licence fee, when people complain about spending money on the licence fee, I totally get that, but at the same time, actually, the cost of the advertising on the independent channels is paid for by the advertising cost loaded onto the prices of everyday goods in the supermarket. And in fact, you would save more on your weekly shop without the independent channels over a year than you would in not paying a licence fee over a year. It actually works out that the BBC is even cheaper than that. And certainly if you're subscribed to something like Sky, then really you are spending a lot more money than you need to for quality programming, especially when the BBC is still turning out good stuff. But it's a torn thing, and I have a lot of criticisms of the BBC, but I think at heart, if we lose it, if it shrinks, it'll be a hole that won't be filled by anything else. Well, although Messrs Murdoch and company will maybe like to fill it, but I don't think they're the people to do it.
You left the BBC.
I did.
You set up your own company.
Yeah.
How was that, going about that? Because you're stepping outside of,
yeah,
amongst other things, a regular salary into this unknown world.
Yeah, my wife would answer this better. She'd swear a lot. Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough. Because just as I left, also Radio 1 decided they'd maybe need to cut back, so we suddenly pretty soon after, weren't making daily things. And it got tough. And I had to, I ended up working with Celador, who are a good company, and we did a lot of Russ Abbott stuff, some Jasper Carrot stuff and so on, working comedy.
Mr. Bean, was that?
Mr. Bean, I got a job doing the Mr. Bean animated, but this was all kind of picking up work through, people asking me to do something, and thank goodness I was free. I was being looked after, God looks after fools, drunks and freelancers, and I was just about scraping by. But really, I think it wasn't until we were able to pick up with Douglas Adams. Douglas, I got back in touch with me in the late 90s and said, how do you fancy doing a video game with no pictures? And I said, okay. And he said, do you want to come around and have a chat about it? Come around. So I went round to Digital Village in Camden, where he was, and we went through this idea, and I thought, I think this could work, but I don't think it's a mainstream hit. And then I said, well, what about Hitchhikers? It all went away, and can't we, do that and so on? Yes, good idea. Yeah, why not? Yeah. He said, but who's going to adapt it? I said, well, I would. If you haven't got time, I'll do it. So, all right, okay. So he said, well, I'll send you all the stuff. I'll send you all the stuff I did, the preparation work on the radio series. So he sent it to me. And it was literally the day I was going to have a look at it, Sophie, his PA, emailed, don't do anything. We've just signed a deal with Disney to make a movie. of Hitchhikers. Like, you know, and I just, there it goes again. The second time I'd lost this holy grail of comedy and science fiction. So I was really down about that, and carried on with the comedy stuff I was doing and so on. And about 2 years later, April the year 2000, it was the year before Douglas died. I saw him in Broadcasting House, in the reception of Broadcasting House, just coming out as I was going in, like you do. And hello, sat down, have a good old chat. And he said, look, it's not dead, you know, I really do want you to do it. I want it to end up back on radio because that's where it started. But it is, you know, we have to make this film, and finally it's happened, and I've taken this. He used to say making a film is like trying to cook a piece of meat by having people breathe on it. It takes that long, you know, which is a great analogy. So, and of course the tragedy was he died in 2001, and that was when finally managed to get the rights sorted out with somebody so that we could make it. So we made the last 3 Hitchhiker series without Douglas, which was just a horrible, horrible thing. But in his honour, which was a great thing too. And that was a great sort of learning curve. So that really was a wonderful little process.
The list goes on. I mean, your Wikipedia just is never ending of things you've worked on. The Gemini Apes, something close to your heart.
No, that was my Spielberg film.
Right.
Yes, a writer Spielberg script.
What was the gist behind it? What was the?
There was a line in Superman, the John Burns retelling of Superman, where Pa Kent finds the capsule with the baby in it. And he said, well, I heard they were sending up monkeys and dogs, but I didn't know they were sending up babies, you know, because it was like a Cold War gag. And I thought, oh, sending up monkeys, yes. What happens if the monkeys came down more intelligent than they went up? What happens if they came down more intelligent than us? And so up came bubbled up this idea of doing this thing. And it just so happened, we just had a gap opened up in Radio 4's schedule, Christmas 1998. And so we were able to put on this sort of 90-minute blockbuster movie where 2 little chimpanzees return to Earth in their Gemini capsule. They turn into a sort of hot rod car because they land in a scrap yard. So their genius is at recycling. It was all very green, but it was good. I was very pleased. It had chases in it and everything, and a little bit of horror. Yes, no, I'm very proud of the Gemini Apes. Never been repeated, but.
And then there's Sexton Blake.
Sexton Blake.
A name from the past.
Well, yeah, no, I'm Mr. Retread. Yeah, Sexton Blake, fantastic. We had this bonkers. Mind you, the Sexton Blake fans didn't love it at all.
Oh, really?
No, they thought we were taking the mickey. But what we did, Simon Jones played it, who's terribly British. Sexton Blake is this very kind of, you know, lantern-jawed British hero.
Well, it was sort of the first takeoff on Holmes, wasn't it?
Yes,
really?
It was, yeah. And it was very much because Holmes was a hit. It was sort of, how should we say, Shazam to Superman. I don't know. Yeah, that kind of thing, or Captain America to Superman.
A rip-off.
Yeah,
look at it. But
putting it.
It had its own.
But it developed its own sort of pace,
and it ran,
and it was funny. But these guys,
it ran forever.
It did run forever. But these guys came up with the script. It was just so funny, and it ended up with a duel on top of a Zeppelin over Big Ben. I mean, who could not? Even though it's radio, you know, it's still an image that you can't get away with. It just made me laugh. Yeah. It was funny. But it's worth seeking out because I can't quote from it. The gags are too clever for that. Right. But it's great, yes. Very good.
Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
There's a name.
Yeah, him.
And you've worked closely with Neil.
Neil, yes. We've known Neil for 20 years, but actually only worked with him really closely for the last 4 or 5. Tried to get him on Radio 4 for years and years and years. BBC, I think, felt it was lowbrow comic book stuff for whatever reason. And then finally, a wonderful Northern Ireland BBC producer called Heather Lama actually managed to persuade them to take a Neil thing. And bless him, Neil suggested to Heather that I should do the adaptation. So we did Neverwhere. And then they got this cast. So I'm going into read-through, and around the table, going that way, I've got Natalie Dormer, James McAvoy, Sophie Okonedo, Benedict Cumberbatch, Bernard Cribbins, Andrew Sachs, David Harewood, Christopher Lee.
That's a cast, isn't it?
And I'm holy. SH1T.
Is it connecting to your childhood? I mean, these are, you know...
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I couldn't. But the thing was that it just flew. It flew. Everybody wanted to be there because, you know, it's like a domino effect. You get the right person, get Christopher Lee in, then, you know, certain other people say yes to it. And interestingly, James McAvoy, who is a great guy, I said to him, we've read through the first 3 episodes of Neverwhere, then we broke for lunch. And he came up and he said, well, you know, I think Richard's a bit whiny in episode 3. Can we change it a bit? You know, and I said, yeah, absolutely. You know, because he had an idea of how he wanted to play it. And you when you work with an actor who really knows what they're good at, you shape, you massage the material a bit. So he said that, and I said, but before you go, what are you doing here? You know, what made you do this? He said, I love this stuff. And that was it. Because, I mean, you know, he was earning per day on that, what he'd earn in a minute on an X-Men film. But he just loves Neil and the work.
Right.
And because he would do it, then Benedict did it. And Benedict does radio all the time, because Benedict's a proper actor with no edge to him at all. He's just a great bloke. So, you know, it all kind of falls together like that. And then we had this, but then I had, because I hadn't done a big production for a while, a really big one like that.
You adapted it, did you?
I adapted and co-directed with Heather, and then I did all the post-production. I take it all away with me. And
how do you work like that with somebody like Neil? I mean, are you sending him each page as you do it?
No, not at all. He just leaves me to it.
Right.
He gets out of my way.
Yeah.
And then he'll put in the odd note like, yeah, wouldn't do this, wouldn't do that. I'm doing something with him right now, and got a note from him yesterday, which was, the currency in the plays we're talking about wouldn't be shillings. I had some, that'll be 3 shillings, please. He said, no, it's more likely to be groats and farthings. You know, that's the sort of. Neil will give me detailed notes, but in terms of structure, so far we've had a very good relationship. No, although it's wonderful to work with a living author rather than someone like Douglas who's resolutely dead. So yeah, that's good. So I can email Neil. You know,
pros and cons.
Yeah, it's a definite pro. Yes, and of course, when he was alive, Terry Pratchett, because we did Good Omens while Terry was still with us, and still reasonably compos mentis. So we had a very good day recording Neil and Terry as traffic cops, and I was able to say to Terry, "Is there anything in particular about Good Omens?" And he said, "You know, I want try and preserve the humour, whatever you do. Don't make it dark." And that's fine. So you see, it's just little touches on the tiller like that make me steer the boat a couple of points, you know, to the starboard or whatever.
Every time I look into the music world, I see the Riotous Brothers popping up. You have this separate career running parallel.
We've been talking about the day job so far, and that's what I do for fun. No, I'm a drummer.
You're a drummer, and not just any drum set, but you have a
Ludwig's. Excuse me, absolutely, super classic.
As we sit here,
same
in
as
Liverpool.
Ringo's third kit onwards.
Right.
No, different finish, but yeah.
And why is that? Is it indeed because?
Oh no, it's because of Ringo and John Bonham.
Yeah.
Really, and also the sound of the '60s for me is Ludwig drums are the sound of the '60s, and when you tune them right, they still are.
Right.
And I'm not talking about cardboard boxes. I'm talking about proper tuning. He said, But so no.
How would you describe the band?
A blues band, a really very urban blues, kind of Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of stuff. Stevie Ray Vaughan. I'm supposing modern bands, a little bit like the Hoax, maybe. These are all bands on the circuit. Joe Bonamassa, a little bit of that kind of feel to it,
Coming to a venue near you?
Well, I'd love to. Love to. We'd love to come and play up in Liverpool. We really would. Yeah, that would be a thrill. We've played in the States. We've done a mini tour of the States, and we've played in south of France, and we've got a Holland trip lined up. So yeah, would love to do it. But
how do you describe your audience?
Very attractive. Strangely attractive.
You can't beat that.
No, I mean, you know, people who enjoy the blues, it's a broad church, but generally speaking, it's people who grew up with the music of the 60s and the 70s because that had the blues root. So it's kind of aging, but it's really interesting because there's a lot of young bands coming on the blues circuits, real young lions, really good musicians. There's some really great guitarists up there, and it kills me that people aren't that young people don't realise how much talent there is out there, and what is a fantastic music form which still feeds into our popular music today. But then of course, the X Factor and things like that kind of squishes it all out, the music, the sort of stuff that goes on. But no, it's interesting, there's a wonderful Chantel McPherson is her name. I think of her as Tel Mac, because that's what she calls herself. It's a wonderful blues guitarist. This little girl, she's from I think Yorkshire or up further in Lancashire, and she plays tear your face off blistering blues guitar wearing a ball gown. That is class.
That's entertainment.
And she's probably she's not even as old as my youngest son. And she's just kills me. And she goes around with her mum and dad and plays these gigs in a 3-piece. And she plays 100 Club in London, and the place is packed out. There is a whole world of music people know nothing about, because it's sort of, it's like Bernie Sanders in the election campaign. People don't see it, the media miss out on it. So there's some great music out there.
There is. In adapting a story across to another media, how much leeway do you give yourself?
Lots.
I
learned that on working on Hitchhikers with Douglas when when we started working together. He told me I had to stick exactly to the third book because it had to be so. And I said, but it doesn't start. The third book doesn't start where the second radio series left off. And Douglas said, doesn't matter, because he wasn't happy with where that left off. So I carried on and did it that way, and of course by this time Douglas was no longer with us, and we got to the end of it and I thought, yeah, but that could have been better if I'd followed my instincts and made it more jazzed up, and not by changing anything he did, but by going slavishly word to word is quite heavy going. So instead, when we came to the 4th and 5th series, where I'd made no such promise and where the story goes off at a serious right angle, I brought back in characters like the Vogons, who eventually destroy the Earth and so on and so forth. And I had the parallel story of what was happening with them at the same time as I was running the story that Douglas was telling about Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect and all of that lot. And by doing that, and because I did that, I was looking very carefully as we did the first series, at what the fan sites were saying. And a lot of them were sort of expressing a sort of kind of a feeling that there was a lack of adventure in it all. So I did this with the others, and thank goodness when I looked at what they were saying, they said, actually, we really like what he's done with this. So that was good, and that's where I got brave about adapting anything. So when I see Neil Gaiman gets it, for example. So when I adapt something of Neil's and I change something or I add to it, and this thing I'm working on at the moment, which we're recording in a couple of weeks' time, I've actually added a whole new beginning onto it. It's a short story about characters that Neil is very famous for. I've actually invented a whole beginning on it, which Neil didn't have, and he just came back and said it's great. So I kind of think I've got the knack of doing it in a way that's sympathetic with the writer I'm working with.
Radio, the Cat's Whisker, I mean, it must be the centenary, is it? Or it must be...
well, yeah, radio, it's hard to say. I mean, 2LO was 1923, the BBC's Savoy Hill, 1922-23.
We're
so
speeding in that direction, aren't we? Just
towards the centenary, yeah.
What do you think the state of radio today? Local, national?
I think it's very interesting where we are with radio today, because 10 years ago I would have given you a completely different answer. Or 11 or 12 years ago I would have told you that I think radio, spoken word radio, is dying out, except for news channels. But in terms of drama and sort of talks and so on and so forth, nothing was happening. And then along came the internet and podcasting, and suddenly this thing is blown wide open. And what's really exciting, there are two things that really excite me. First of all, that in America, kids are now doing audio theatre, as they call it, TER, because they find it fun, and they get together and they email each other their performances recorded at home as one character, and somebody in the middle edits it all together. Now, it doesn't always sound perfect, but they're playing with an art form that effectively died out in America in the late 50s, radio as a spoken word entertainment medium. So that's an amazing thing. And the second thing that's happened, which is very exciting, is that Audible, the big Amazon company, got in touch with me about 18 months ago and said, would you be interested in doing a big audio movie set in the Alien universe for us? And we want to push the boat out, and we want you to do the audio movie thing on it, and we want you to put everything you think of in it, and so on and so forth. And that was the point at which I thought, if Audible are now getting aboard the idea of really high production values audio, then we actually have got an exciting time coming up, because suddenly, I mean, radio as such will always continue, I think, but if people are listening to spoken word for entertainment in earphones the same way that they do on the bus listen to music, then we've got a brilliant outlet for what is a fantastically exciting art form and storytelling form. Really, it's about telling stories, and you can tell them visually in sound just as you can with pictures. So I'm really excited about that.
That's great to hear. You're in Liverpool today to give a show
love
at the
Liverpool.
Central
It's great to be
Library. Can you tell us about the show, and after that, what's the future for Dirk Maggs?
Well, I feel I've kind of done the talk. But it's about.
But there will be images as well.
Yeah,
I believe.
it's about the history of radio drama and audio theatre, but with a few illustrations of how we achieve the things we do, like sound effects, how we get vocal effects, and so on and so forth. And the thing about radio is nobody ever sees you doing it. It's a bit like, you know, if you went to Studio 2 at Abbey Road and the Beatles are recording there, it's kind of just like a mess. There's just stuff everywhere, and you know, like it's not there to be beautiful, it's there to sound good. And so a radio studio is kind of a bit of a mystery to people. I think, oh well, they just stand at microphones with a script, which is in essence true, but there's a lot more to it than that. And what's really fun is to actually show people not only what goes on behind the scenes, but how we achieve the effects we achieve. And some of it, and I've got, you know, there are little bits of video of us working in the studio, putting stuff together around the actors, but also talking about sound in general, and the idea that, for example, Jurassic Park works as a movie, let's say, as much because of the sound and the pictures. And if you actually take the soundtrack off Jurassic Park, it's more a nature film than a kind of adventure film. So it's that kind of, you know, thinking about sound and what part it plays in our lives. And also, you know, when you watch a video, if you watch it in a foreign language, when in the English language somebody puts a plate down on a cup and then stands up from a chair and it creaks, then go to the Hungarian, say, version, or German or whatever, if you have another language on it, and listen to the soundtrack, and you'll hear exactly the same teacup down and the same chair as they get up, which means that all the sound effects are added in post along with that Hungarian voice, which begs the question, how much of a movie is ever recorded on set? Which, according to Billy Boyd from Lord of the Rings, he said they overdubbed every line of dialogue in the Lord of the Rings. So basically nothing you hear on the soundtrack of Lord of the Rings was recorded in the room with the actors when the film was shot. So that's a kind of interesting thing. So that's the gist of the talk. It's about sound, it's about audio theatre, and so on and so forth. And what's in the future, there's some really big projects, and none of them I can talk about, which is really frustrating, but very exciting. If I'm in work, it means that audio movies or audio theatre must still be working, it must still be doing business, which is great.
So, Dirk Maggs, to be continued.
Yes.
Doesn't get better than that.
Yeah.
Dirk, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.